Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to another lesson in sociological theory. Today we're going to be discussing the work of Irving Goffman and his theory, his sociological theory of how people have interactions and how people present themselves to others. His most famous book is called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, and that's your reading for today from the textbook. So as always, you want to have your handout with you as you go through this video or watch this video. And I'm also going to be switching back and forth with some pictures. So this lesson, I'm not going to be showing the handout on the screen, rather some photos that kind of are going to help illustrate the lesson. Okay, so let's jump right in. So the best way to understand Goffman is to actually connect him back to an earlier thinker, George Herbert Mead. So like the other people I've been discussing on the video lectures, I've been connecting them back to the classical theorists, and I'm doing that again with Goffman, and we're going to connect it back to George Herbert Mead and the theory or the general approach of sociology called symbolic interactionism. So what is symbolic interactionism? So really the basic idea of symbolic interactionism is that through people interacting with each other, they are creating the social world around them. That it is that the world that we see and the world we inhabit is in some sense created by us. In this way, it's really similar to the idea of social construction, right, that we talked about last week. Right, that the world that we see, the world out there that we take to be natural and real, is actually something that we are creating ourselves. And symbolic interactionism is really saying, well, it's really our interactions with one another that are creating the world and creating the reality of it. So it is this kind of communal, collective approach. The important thing with symbolic interactionism is that it has basically kind of three main assumptions. And they are, first, that humans use symbols, right? So symbolic interactionism, emphasizes symbols, not surprisingly. And so the idea here is that, what is a symbol, right? A symbol is something in the world that represents something else, right? So a stop sign is a symbol. Red light is a symbol. These are symbols, and they are representing something else, right? The stop sign is telling you to stop, right? But it's not just what we might call verbal symbols. So, stop sign is a concrete symbol. The written language are symbols. So when you see a word written out, or the words on your handout, those are symbols. But symbols are not just verbal or written symbols. They can really be almost anything. So a symbol can be a facial expression, right? So somebody laughing, or somebody being sad, contorting their face in a certain way, that is a symbol, right? We know what's going on inside the person by what they're representing or what they're symbolizing through their facial expression. Right? Other symbols. The middle finger is a symbol, of somebody being annoyed or frustrated with you. And so really symbols are everywhere around us. And the first basic idea of symbolic interactionism is that we are passing symbols back and forth, right? By giving and receiving symbols, we are creating meaning in the world, and we are understanding, the world around us. And so we create symbols, and then we also receive them, right? And in essence, where do these symbols come from? They come from us. The symbols of the world are generated and created by humans. And so which leads to the second assumption, right? That social reality is created by humans, right? The reality of the world around us cannot be taken for granted, is not just there, it's something that we have created. And so our interactions with each other create that reality, right? So it's a interaction that's this interactionism part of symbolic interaction, that we are creating the world around us, right? And so social reality does not exist on its own, ready-made, but it is created by us. And so this is really to emphasize that we are participants. We are the creators of our own reality, but not individual creators, but collective creators, right? We are creating it in a group. And then the third main assumption to social interactionism is that there are patterns to our interactions. And we're going to see this today with Goffman, right? That our interactions are not something that we just create on the fly, not just something we do, out of the blue. They are preset patterns to how we interact with one another, right? Ways that you're supposed to do it. And so even though our interactions create the world, society also creates our interactions. And so it's kind of a loop, right? Our interactions create our social reality, but then in turn, our social reality create our interactions. So that's the basis of symbolic interactionism, right? That, it's the symbols that humans create through their interactions with each other that create the reality of the world around them. And these interactions are patterned. Okay, let's jump right into Goffman then and really see his approach or his take on symbolic interactionism. So the best place to start with Goffman is to go in with this idea of what's called dramaturgy. And basically the idea of dramaturgy is that social life and social interactions can be best understood through the metaphor of the theater or drama, right? That, having an interaction is like being an actor on a stage, right? And so what is an actor on a stage trying to do? They are trying to portray a character, right? Either a villain or a hero or some other stock character. And so just like an actor on a stage, when we are out in society, when we are in front of other people, we are also portraying ourselves. We are trying to represent ourselves. And so in this way, how does this connect to symbolic interactionism? Ourselves are the symbol, right? How we portray ourselves, the shirts that we wear, the clothes that we wear, our shirts, our mannerisms, how we present ourselves, those are all symbolic of a portrayal of who we are trying to say that we are, right? And so really what Goffman is saying is our interaction is a performance, right? Whenever we're in front of other people, we're not just behaving, we're not just doing something, we are performing, right? We are acting, right? We are portraying who we are. We're not just being who we are. Okay, let me see an example of this. So now I'm going to show a photo. Okay. Okay, so you should be able to see on the screen here a photo. And what this photo is what's called a stock photo. So basically what a stock photo is if you want to advertise something, like if you want to create a pamphlet or a poster or an ad for your business, what you can do is you can go to the internet and buy a photo. And what these are called stock photos. And so what we can see is, photographers get some actors together, they pay them, and then they photograph little scenes like this one, right? So what is the scene of? Oh, it's a birthday party, right? And so we can know here that everybody in this photo is an actor. They are getting paid to get photographed, right? They are all pretending. They're not actually at a birthday party, right? They're not actually that happy. They are all actors who are getting paid, and they are performing for the photographer, right? And the photographer is going to sell this photo for whoever wants to buy it. And so what we can see here is that obviously these people in this photo are actors. They are pretending to portray certain characters, right? The birthday girl, maybe the boyfriend, the guy on the left, right? Some friends, right? And the whole thing is people enjoying a birthday party. And so it's pretty clear here that these people are performing and that they're actors. What Goffman says is that this is true not just when people are getting paid for appearing in a photograph, but this is true all the time. When you go to a party, right? When you have ever been to a birthday party, you have also been performing, right? You didn't get paid for it. You weren't a paid actor, but all the time we are all unpaid actors, right? We're all amateur actors. And we are performing in front of people all the time. We are trying to represent ourselves. We're trying to portray a character called ourselves, right? And so that's really the idea of Goffman, right? That we are always acting, and how do we act? How do we perform ourselves? Through symbols, through signs. And so this photo is actually a pretty good example of this, right? How do we know it's a birthday party? Through certain symbols, right? Not verbal symbols, not not written symbols, but through more maybe more subtle symbols that are not that subtle though, really, right? So we have balloons, we have a birthday cake, we have presents, right? Think about all the, think about a present. Why do we wrap presents up in wrapping paper, right? So that the person knows that it's a present, right? The wrapping paper is the symbol of a present, right? You don't just hand somebody, I don't know, a record or a CD. You wrap it up and then it becomes a present, right? But it's not just balloons and a birthday cake and presents, but it's also people's facial expressions. It's also the clothes that they're wearing, right? People are wearing their party shirts, right? And so all these things are symbols. They're creating the presentation of a birthday party, right? And so together, collectively, these people are giving a performance of a birthday party. And that's what we do, all of us do when we go to a birthday party, right? A birthday party is nothing more than a bunch of people acting like it's a birthday party, right? We are creating the social reality of around us, right? And so again, finally, people's actions are a form of communication, right? When you're doing something, when you're eating a birthday cake, when you're giving a present, when you're laughing at a party, you're not just doing those things, you're communicating. You're communicating to somebody by doing those actions. The clothes that you wear, the phone that you have, the car that you drive, all those things are a form of communication. They are symbols of you trying to communicate to other humans something, who you are. Okay, let me go back to the full video. Okay, so all social life is a performance. So if that's true, what are the elements of that performance? So Goffman talks about a few different elements of that performance. Some of these he talks about in your reading for today. And so I'll mention them when they come up in the reading, mention them, the things that connect to the reading. So what's one of the first elements of a performance? Well, one of the first elements is a script, right? If you're an actor, you're gonna have a script. So that's not just true for, actual performances, actual plays or movies. That's true in everyday life, right? Often, much of our social life is scripted out for us, right? So when you go buy a cup of coffee, there's a script, right? It's a very boring, mundane script of saying please and thank you and here's your change, but it's still a script. You know what you're supposed to say and you play your part and you say it. That's what people do most of the time. A birthday party is also a script. You go in and you say, happy birthday, and you must be so happy, right? All of that is a script, right? You didn't invent that. That was something those were lines that you knew you were expected to say, right? So just like in movies and TV, social life has scripts, and we play them out. We perform those scripts. Okay, what else from the theater? So just like the theater has props, social life has props. So, in the theater, a prop is a sword or a gun or, something else like that. In social life, a prop can be all those physical items in the world that help us perform something, right? So it can be the balloons at a birthday party. It can be the cake at a birthday party, right? It's all the things that allow us to communicate, right? The physical symbols of the world, right? What's a really good example of a prop? So let me share another picture. So how do we know what occupation this woman is, right? How do we know that she is a doctor, right? We can see the photo and we're like, oh, that's a doctor. How do we know that? Well, this person has a prop, right? She has what we can call the costume of a doctor, right? Her white coat, her stethoscope, the notes, I think she's carrying, all right? And so we know that the person is a doctor because of the prop or costume that they were wearing. And we can even wonder, well, what's the point of these clothing, right? What's the purpose of a doctor wearing these things? It is the performance, right? The reason why the doctor wears these clothes is so that we know that the person's a doctor, right? It is a costume, or what we call a uniform, right? And so it's not just doctors. Many people wear costumes, right? So the police officer wears a costume. If you've ever worked at a restaurant, the waiter, right? Waiter's wearing a costume, like the black shirt and the apron. That's a costume, right? I'm wearing a costume, right? A collared shirt. That's kind of a costume of a teacher or a professor, right? And so a lot of times we have physical objects that help us communicate who we are to other people, right? Props. Okay, so we got scripts, we got props. What else do you need to give a performance? Well, you need a stage, right? In the reading, Goffman calls this a setting, right? And so just like you need a stage for a play to tell you where you are, right? In social life, we need stages. And we have built them. We have physically created the stages of social life, right? A classroom, a library, a restaurant, a bar, right? A nightclub, right? A park. All of these are stages. They are not just physical places. They are places that we created to allow us to give a certain performance, right? And so, the places that we inhabit are not just places, they are stages. One main stage difference, one different type of stages that Goffman talks about is what he calls the front stage and a backstage. And so importantly with Goffman, what he says is that the stage will shape the type of interactions that we have, right? That the setting or stage is not just allows us to give a performance, but allows us to give a specific type of performance, right? So the way that you interact, the way that you perform is going to be different than, say, at a library than at a restaurant, right? That there's going to be a different expectation of how you're going to act at these two different stages, right? The stages create or help create the performance. One main difference then is the front stage and the backstage, right? And so a front stage is what? A front stage is all the spaces of public life, all the spaces that we can be seen, right? So a park, a restaurant, a coffee shop. These are all the front stage, right? These are where we're in front of other people. We know we're being watched, and because we're being watched, we have to give a performance. We have to show people, what we're like. So if there's a front stage, then that means that there's a backstage, right? A spaces in the world that are less, where we feel that we are less watched or scrutinized, right? So these can be like your bedroom, right? You go into your bedroom, you lock the door, right? Or you shut the door, and you no longer have this feeling of, oh, well, I'm on stage, I have to watch what I wear, right? We can relax, right, in our bedrooms because we're no longer on stage, we're no longer giving a performance, right? And so we have these backstages to life, places where we're allowed to turn off the performance. We're not expected to perform. But it's not just bedrooms, it's a whole bunch of places, right? A bathroom is a backstage, even a public bathroom, right? Even though that there's other people in it, in public bathrooms, we kind of pretend often like that there's nobody else there. Like we don't look at each other in the face. You kind of just wash your hands, do your thing, and it's like everybody in the public bathroom is pretending like there are not other people around, because the public bathroom is a backstage. It's a place where you're not really supposed to be giving, not really a place where you're supposed to be watched or you're giving a performance. So what do people do in the backstage? Well, they turn off the performance, but what they also do is they get ready to perform in the front stage, right? They get ready to transition from the backstage to the front stage and give a performance. Again, the public bathroom is a great example of this. What do people do in a bathroom? Okay, so they do the obvious, but after they're done with that, what do? They go and they wash their hands, and then they look at themselves in the mirror, right? We can ask ourselves, why are there even mirrors in a bathroom? They are there so that people can check their costume, see how they look, because soon enough, they're going to transition from the backstage of the bathroom to the front stage of social life. And so we have to see if we look okay. Are we ready to perform? Is my hair okay? Is my shirt okay? I now have to kind of get ready to go out into the world. Right? And so people in the backstage, they prepare themselves for the front stage. So all this is, what Goffman is really talking about. In summary, he's really saying that our interactions in everyday life are like an actor performing on a stage. So what's an example of this? This is all a little bit abstract. What would be an example be? So let me do one more photo and give you as an example. Okay, here's the photo. So it's a very familiar photo probably to people. It's a photo of a bunch of people in a subway car. And so it's actually an interesting example of a performance. So what Goffman says is that everybody here is doing a performance, right? Which is interesting because what we see here in this photo is it doesn't really seem like people are interacting with one another, right? It doesn't really seem like people are even really acknowledging each other's presence or existence, right? Everybody seems to be doing their own thing, often their own world, right? We see people on cell phones, we see people reading a book, we see people going through their notes. Nobody even really seems to see each other. What Goffman says is, even though it seems that this is just everybody off in their own world, what's actually happening here is everybody is actually giving a performance. It's a performance that he calls civil inattention. Everybody actually in this photo, and this is a real photo, it's not, these are not obviously paid actors like the stock photo. Everybody here is acting. They're giving a performance, and their performance is one of pretending like nobody else exists, right? And so this is what happens sometimes in public places, right? Particularly places in which there are a lot of people around us. So subway cars, buses, elevators, public bathrooms. What happens is people kind of pretend like they don't see each other. So people don't look at each other in the face. They don't kind of acknowledge each other, right? And so what's happening here is people, this is not a natural thing, this is a performance, right? People are, in some sense, pretending like they don't see each other, right? They're giving each other their space, we might say. And so this is actually a performance that everybody is collectively doing together, right? It's a script, right? So first we can see it's a script. We know that this is the performance that's expected of people to act. You're not going to go up to somebody and just, start talking to a stranger or looking at people in the eyes, that you'd be weird or something, right? You know that the script is, look away or look down, right? Also, we can see props, right? What are the props? A cell phone, the book, the person wearing earphones, right? These are all props. They're not just physical objects, they're physical objects allowing us to give the performance of civil inattention, right? And so it's all really, a prop, and it also has a stage, obviously, right? It's actually a weird stage. It's a front stage, but a front stage trying to be a backstage. And so, this is a good example of how even when it seems like people are not interacting, they're actually giving a performance for each other. So all this is, the basics of dramaturgy. Let me kind of talk about one more thing before moving on to the reading. And so another way to understand Goffman is to talk about the concept of impression management and information gains. So what is impression management? So what Goffman says is that if we're giving a performance in front of other people, what are we trying to do? What he says is what we're trying to do is manage other people's impressions of us. We're trying to shape and affect how other people think of us, right? We do this by the information that people have about us, right? We only give certain information. We do this by controlling our performance, controlling how we speak and how we talk and what we physically look like, right? And so all of us want to give a kind of a specific performance. We're trying to manage the impression, our audience, but we're trying to manage the impression other people have of us, our audience. So what's a good example of this? So let me go to one more photo. So a good example of how we manage impressions is during a job interview, right? That during a job interview, you're very conscious of the impression that you're trying to make, right? You're trying to appear confident, you're trying to appear knowledgeable and professional, right? Even if that's not who you really are, even if you're kind of a goofball or you're kind of lazy, when you go into the job interview, you're going to give a performance that's not really who you are, right? It's going to be a little bit insincere, right? It's going to be very managed, right? And you're doing this to control or shape what the interviewer thinks about you. And so what Goffman then says is what this does is sets up what he calls an information game. And so basically what an information game is, it's kind of a game of cat and mouse, right? You're trying to control the impression that other people have about you by, acting a certain way, only giving certain information. The other person knows this, and so they're trying to figure out who you really are, right? They know that you're trying to control, they're trying to manage impressions, and so they're trying to kind of figure out who you really are and whether or not you're being authentic. And so what Goffman calls this is an information game, a game in which people kind of go back and forth, one person trying to shape your impression and then the other person trying to see what you really are like. Let me now turn to the reading. So the reading really is, really sets up nicely a lot of the things that we, have been talking about. he talks about he starts talking about what he calls cynical versus sincere um, um, performances, and so that's actually a good distinction, a nice distinction. So it can sound like, as I've been describing it, as if people's presentations or performances are fake, right? That people are fakers and they're pretending, and you can't really trust people or believe them. But Goffman's doesn't really say that. He says, okay, yes, in some performances, people are cynical. And what he means by this is he says they don't believe in the part that they're playing. They know that that's not who they are. So, some examples he uses are, car salesmen. He says, oh, these people, they're trying to sell a car, and so they're pretending, they're acting a certain way just to do that. They don't really believe, they might not even like the car, and they might not really believe it's a very good car, but they're not going to tell you that, right? And they're faking it. They're cynical. But at the other end of the spectrum, what Goffman says is there are sincere performances of people who really believe that's who they are, right? So the doctor who really feels like a doctor and says, they feel confident and, they believe in themselves as a doctor, they still have to give a performance, right? They still have to put on their white jacket and they still have to have the stethoscope, right? Even though they sincerely believe that they are who they say they are, they still have to perform it. And so what Goffman says is, it can kind of go back and forth between a cynical performance to a sincere one. And, and there's a bunch of performances in the middle, a bit cynical, mostly sincere, mostly cynical, a little bit sincere. And people can move back and forth, right? You can start off as cynical, right? You're faking it at the start, but over time, you become you become the part that you're playing, right? You played a part so well that you fool yourself and you sincerely believe in who you are trying to be, right? And so Goffman sets up, the first part of reading is he sets up this nice distinction between sincere and cynical performances. Then he also talks about fronts, and fronts is really, in some sense, what I've been talking about in the first part of the video, right? How people give a performance. He talks about settings. He talks about people's personal front, right? So that can be, your appearance, the clothes that you wear, but it can also be your mannerisms, what he calls your manners, the tone of your voice, the kind of jokes that you make, how you talk, and, how you walk, everything about you. That's a form of communication, right? He calls these sign vehicles, kind of another interesting, part. Sign vehicles, things that carry our symbols, right? So we can think about the clothes that we wear as sign vehicles. They're carrying a representation of ourselves to other people. And so he talks about, dramatic realization, how people are presenting themselves, performing or dramatically realizing their character, right? That you kind of have to believe in who you are, and that the performance in some way is the most important part of, say, your job, right? So in some sense, one of the most important parts of being a doctor is acting like a doctor. One of the most important parts of the job of police officer is giving the performance of a police officer. And so these performances are not just, side issues. They are sometimes the most important part of what we're doing. Let me end with one last part, and that's Goffman's view of the self. So if you remember from Mead, to connect this back to Mead said that, what is the self? The self is this kind of photograph or image that we carry around in our heads of ourselves, right? We see ourselves in the morning brushing our teeth, and, who do we think that person is? Each one of us has this kind of self-image or self-identity and an understanding of who we are, how we're unique, how we're different. And, Mead says that, we create this self through interaction with other people. And Goffman is going to say a very similar thing, right? He's going to say that our performances are what, in some sense, help create the self. So it's actually an interesting take, right? And so you really should be looking at the handout right now to kind of follow along with this. So we can ask ourselves, okay, what does the title of his book mean? Right? Your reading for today is the presentation of self in everyday life. And so what does that mean? What does the title mean, the presentation of self in everyday life? So normally what we might think is, we might think something like this. We might think that, okay, what it means is that a person has a self-identity. A person has a sense of self, right? They have this image in their head. And then what they do is, with that image in their head, they go out and perform it to other people, right? I feel, I have an idea of myself as, say, a teacher, right? And so then with that idea in my head, I go out and I give a performance of that. I'm like, oh, I'm a professor, I'm a teacher, I have to go out and then now perform it. But what Goffman is saying is no, that's not the way it works. It's actually the other way around. What he's going to say is, what comes first is not the sense of self and then the performance, but it's actually what comes first is the performance. So what he's going to say is, people go into the world, they interact, and they give a performance, right? They act like a teacher, they act like a police officer. And then it's that performance that creates the self. It's not the self that creates a performance. It's performing that creates a sense of self. And so that's a really kind of key part to this whole thing, right? And so what Goffman's title of the book actually means is, it's not the performance of the self, but it's how the self is realized or presents, right? How it comes to existence in everyday life. And so that's a really kind of a radical thing. And so what Goffman is saying is, actually there is no sense of self before a performance. We only realize ourselves through interactions with others and by acting, right? It's by performing and acting that we create a sense of self. Okay, I think that's enough for this lesson, enough of a performance by me. I hope you have all gotten something good from it. Okay.